Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my first review in the Halloween season. I have technically already been running my Halloween intro on some of my videos through September, simply because a lot of Halloween events already get started in September. But now that we're officially in October, I wanted to finally tackle the final installment in the Halloween franchise that I had yet to cover. So for those of you who are unaware, over the course of the last few years, I'd been slowly covering various films in this franchise. I'll leave a link to the playlist down below with all the ones I've already covered. But for those of you who have already seen it and just need a quick recap, I've already covered the first 5 films in the original timeline of Halloween films. I've covered the Rob Zombie remakes, and I've covered the newest 3 films that erased all of the sequels except for the original film, and were kind of playing off of, Jamie Lee Curtis coming back and all that. Those just wrapped up within the last couple of years, and so now that leaves us with only 3 films, including the one we're talking about today. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on the 6th film in the Halloween franchise, which is simply titled Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. Directed by Joe Chappelle, this film stars people like Pleasence, Paul Rudd, Marianne Hagan, Mitch Ryan, and more. And immediately, I'm sure many of you are wondering which version of the film I'm going to be talking about. And if you aren't familiar with what I'm discussing, this film actually has 2 different cuts of the film that are pretty distinctly different. A lot of times when you get a director's cut or something like that, it'll add a little bit more, maybe some added context to a couple of things. But in the case of Halloween 6, you have 2 entirely different cuts of the film. You have the theatrical release cut that was the one that the studio pushed for, that has a lot more gore, but a lot less story, and is a lot less convoluted, but in a lot of ways feels pretty aimless, and includes scenes from the producer's cut, which is the one I watched for this video, that just don't make sense in there. The producer's cut, though, is the one that adds a lot more story, especially when it comes down to the cult storyline that is incredibly divisive amongst fans. And in general, the 2 versions are very different, with the producer's cut having far less kills, but again, adding more to the story side of things. All in all, though, this is a film that is pretty hated in the world of Halloween. I think most people who have seen this film are not a really big fan of it, especially when it came out in 1995. It had been about 6 years since a new installment in the franchise, and here we are with this one that popped up, and most people just felt like it added this unnecessary lore to the killer of Michael Myers. Another thing to mention before we get into my thoughts on the film is that I will be breaking down my thoughts on the film in general, but I also thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about the 2 versions of the film, some of the key differences, and which one maybe I prefer, or which element I think is better in which installment. I will try not to be too long-winded here, but a big thanks to anybody who takes the time to watch through this whole video. I do want to mention, though, that this is also the last for an actor and the first for an actor. This was unfortunately the last film for actor Pleasence, who of course played Dr. Loomis across all of these films up to this point. This film also underwent massive reshoots, which is part of the whole difference between the theatrical and the producer's cut, and Pleasence unfortunately passed away before those were done. So it was one of those situations where they had to act off of him when he's not able to play off of them himself. So some of those sequences come off a little bit goofy, but this is also the first ever film for actor Paul Rudd, who of course has gone on to become a huge star, including being part of the MCU and tons of other franchises. So yeah, it's really funny to see him here at such a young age, definitely hamming it up, and we're going to get a little bit more into that in just a second. But yeah, let's get into what this film is all about first, and then we'll get into my thoughts. 6 years after the events of Halloween 5, Jamie Lloyd gives birth to a child while held captive by a mysterious cult that seems to control Michael Myers. After escaping with the baby, Jamie is pursued by Michael, who is once again unleashed on Haddonfield. Meanwhile, the Strode family, relatives of Laurie, who now live in Michael's childhood home, find themselves caught in the carnage. Kara Strode, her son Danny, her mother, and her abusive father John become Michael's newest targets, while Tommy Doyle, all grown up, and Dr. Loomis uncovered the disturbing truth behind Michael's curse and the cult of Thorn. And immediately, as far as my thoughts on this film, whether you watch the theatrical or the producer's cut, you're not getting a good film. In terms of performance, in terms of story, in terms of the gore, there isn't really much to either one of these films that I think is really great. I will say this though, if you like gore, if you like big over the top kills, the theatrical version of the film is the one to watch. It's the one that has far more kills, almost double the amount of kills, because the producer's cut cuts out an entire big slashing scene where Michael just murders a bunch of people at the end of this film. But again, the theatrical doesn't really have much plot to it. And there was this whole cult element to the story that is just kind of there in the theatrical version, and it just never is fully explained. And Michael Myers is just kind of like an aimless killer in that film. But then the producer's cut adds far more context, almost too much, giving us a full-on reason as to why Michael Myers is the way he is. But either way, I don't think that this film does anything incredible for the franchise. At this point in the franchise, it felt like a run-of-the-mill slasher coming out in the mid-90s that was definitely a tired kind of rendition of what we had seen already. There was nothing that really sparked it, especially with it coming out 6 years after the last one. There was nothing that really sparked new ideas. This film, in a lot of ways, is a fairly generic Halloween film with some pretty big ideas that swing for the fences but don't really get anywhere, unfortunately. And in terms of performances, it feels like your run-of-the-mill slasher. I would say that the best performance in here is Donald Pleasence as Dr. Loomis. It's a shame this was his last ever role, but despite my grievances with any of these films, I think that he is without a doubt probably the best part in a lot of ways when it comes down to performance. He's definitely playing it up. He definitely leans into the role, and I think he understood who Dr. Loomis had to be, even if the writing wasn't always great. When it comes down to the way that this film starts, we're reintroduced to the character of Jamie Lloyd. Now, you may remember her as the young girl from the previous 2 films in the Halloween franchise, except this time around, she is not played by Danielle Harris because, according to things I read online, they didn't want to give her enough money. So they decided to recast her, being played by J.C. Brandy this time around, and they pretty much kill her off immediately if you watch the theatrical cut. She's killed off gruesomely right after she gives birth to this baby that they allude in the producer's cut is maybe the spawn of Michael Myers, even though Jamie is his niece. They kind of show a sequence alluding to the fact that she was tied up. Michael may have had his way with her.
You what?
Yeah, I don't really know if we needed that detail. So anyway, she gives birth to this baby. Michael Myers ends up killing her brutally. But if you watch the producer's cut of the film, she does survive a little bit longer and then ends up getting shot in the head by the man in black, who was in the previous film and appears here once again. And spoiler alert, which I should say I will be talking fairly openly about this film as time goes on. We find out later on that it's Dr. Wynn, a character who was a nobody in the earlier films, but appears here as a colleague of Dr. Loomis. And yeah, we end up learning that he is the man in black and the leader of the cult, and he ends up killing Jamie Lloyd later on. Either way, it goes without saying that the character of Jamie Lloyd being the central character of the previous 2 films and then being completely dispatched of in this film, played by a different actress, was just ridiculous. I mean, I think just a crazy choice, especially in the modern day. There's not a lot of movies, a lot of franchises that would treat a main character of a franchise in a sequel this way anymore. And so when you look back at some of these older slashers that used to do it, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise did it as well with Dream Master. It's one of those things where it's kind of crazy that you would take a main character from your previous film, recast them, and then kill them off immediately. But that's what they chose to do here with this movie, which immediately kind of undercuts the stakes to a degree, because then you're introduced to a slew of new characters, most notably the character of Kara Strode, who's our main character here, a relative of Jamie Lee Curtis's character. She's played by Marianne Hagan, and she's fine here. She's got her son, Danny, who is having like these visions, and the man in black is speaking to him through his mind in some way, trying to make him the next Michael Myers. Michael Myers is coming after the Strode family here, and you got a bunch of people that get caught in the middle that end up getting murdered by Michael Myers. And in a lot of ways, it's your run-of-the-mill film, but what makes it a little bit different is that we have a returning character of Tommy Doyle, the young boy who Jamie Lee Curtis was the babysitter of in the original film, who returns here, and he's played by Paul Rudd. And as I already mentioned, this is his first ever appearance in a movie, and you can definitely tell. I love that he's become such a big name in film, and he still pretty much looks the same as he does in this film, but he's, become such a better actor. He's an actor that most people are pretty in love with at this point, or at least he's a beloved actor, I should say. And when you look at him here, he's definitely hamming it up. There's this performance he's trying to give to kind of like be off and kind of be weird with this little head twitch, and he's at times putting on a voice that feels like he's trying to almost put on like an English accent, but also like this weird American accent. It feels like he's trying to ham it up. It feels very theatrical, and it feels like because he's a survivor of a traumatic instance from the original film, he's trying to kind of portray this like I'm a little bit zany. This character would end up, of course, being played in Halloween Kills, the newer films that erased this film, by Anthony Michael Hall, which frankly I would say is a far better version of the character, though his fate in that film isn't much better. But yeah, you have Tommy Doyle here, who plays a creepy neighbor across the street who's watching Kara at a certain point. He ends up getting involved when he ends up hearing that Michael is coming back. He ends up learning about what happened with Jamie. He ends up protecting her baby, and there's a whole like, you know, cat and mouse game of like protecting the baby from Michael's coming after. Then you have the cult element to it. All in all, narratively, this film is a disaster. I don't really think there's anything about this film that works on a character level, on a story level. And I think when you look at a character like Michael Myers, I think what makes him terrifying is the notion that he was a kid who just kind of snapped one day and just decided to kill his family, and, you know, just was evil incarnate as a human being. And the fact that this film decided like, hey, let's add this whole element that when he was born, there was this evil rune of thorn that was placed on him by this cult, and he was kind of sent out to be a pawn. Later on in the film, they try to stop him at a certain point, and we see them use runes to stop him, and it works. And yeah, I mean, I totally understand why future films would end up kind of just erasing this from the timeline altogether. It was maybe ambitious, but in the wrong direction. And ultimately, I think just kind of worked against, you know, what makes Michael Myers scary in any way, shape, or form. And in general, I don't think that this film does anything to really elevate the mythos of Michael Myers or the franchise. And in terms of cinematography, practical effects, and all that kind of stuff, it's not really all that great either. I will say, though, if you watch the theatrical cut, there is some pretty solid kills. Some of them are a little bit overblown, like when Mark, the abusive father, ends up getting killed in that original version. His like head explodes. It's so over the top that you can't help but laugh a little bit. But the producer's cut kind of makes the kills a little bit more tame. They're a lot more just like stabbings to the gut. There are a couple other kills in there that are a little bit more, you know, gruesome, but for the most part, they're all pretty tame. And that was kind of part of the issue that the studio had with the director. The studio wanted a far more gory film that had story in the back, and then the, you know, writers of the film, the director of the film, and obviously the producers wanted to make it a little bit more story focused. And I don't think either version really is able to capture anything better than the other one tried to. Though I will say, though, that this film has some moments that will just make you laugh at how cheesy it is. There's still fun to be had here on a goofy level, especially with it being something that's so far in the past. I think if a film like this came out today and was trying to be taken seriously, people probably wouldn't enjoy it, which is probably why it wasn't so well received at the time. But with, you know, hindsight being 2020 in a way, and there being that fun ability to have a retrospect, especially of a sequel that was essentially erased from the timeline, it's fun to go back to this one and just see what they did in terms of, you know, some of the performances, some of the lines of dialogue, some of the way that these characters were directed to act, some of the reshoots that are so clear. Some of it's creepy, some of it's off-putting, especially Michael Myers possibly taking advantage of his niece. That's unnecessary. You what? But then there's also hilarious moments like when Kara thinks that she's about to get captured by the cult, or she's about to get captured by the cult, and decides to swan dive out the window. It's so funny. It feels like it's just a moment from like a Mission Impossible movie that came out of nowhere, that ultimately is only really there to kind of call back to that shot of Michael Myers on the ground at the end of the first film. It's not really needed there, but it's kind of funny, to be honest. And all in all, I think that this movie, outside of those cheesy moments, really doesn't have much. So with that said, let's talk about some of those key differences between the theatrical and producer's cut that I thought were worth mentioning, that at times just make you wonder what was going on behind the scenes. I almost wish I could have been a fly on the wall. The first one would definitely be Jamie Lloyd's fate. I mean, I already mentioned it at the start of this, but, you know, in the original version, she's dispatched of pretty quickly. In the second version, she is, you know, dispatched of, but later on she goes to the hospital and the man in black kills her, whereas in the theatrical cut, Michael Myers kills her pretty immediately. And either way, I think this is complete just disregard for a character, a legacy character from the previous two films that I don't think deserved this kind of fate, and ultimately makes you wonder why they brought her into the story at all. And then I think the most key difference will definitely be Michael's motivation. In the theatrical cut of the film, there isn't much of a motivation. He's just an aimless killer. And then in the producer's cut, like I already mentioned, the cult element just gives gives them this like pawn of the cult element to it. This part of the film that's just supposed to be like he is this pawn of this cult. They control him, and these runes have an ability to send him out to kill or to control him and stop him from killing. Though the rules of it all are incredibly messy and very rarely fully explained. And even when they try to fully explain it, it just sounds dumb. And then one of the big key differences is definitely how the film ends, because in the theatrical cut of the film, you see Kara, Danny, her son, and Tommy get away. They ask Loomis if he's going to come with. He says he has business to attend to. The camera pans down to Michael Myers' mask, and then you just hear screaming off in the distance. There's an ambiguous ending there. Was Dr. Loomis killed? You don't really know. Some people assume that's the case because it was Donald Pleasence's final film, so maybe there was this intention to just like kind of send him off by having him killed by Michael Myers, kind of bringing things full circle. But in the producer's cut, which is the version I watched for this video, you have them get away, and then Dr. Loomis comes back inside to the area that Michael Myers had been stopped by the runes earlier in the film, and you have him discover that Dr. Wynn is now there in the Michael Myers outfit. He explains that Michael got away, and he ends up transmitting the rune of thorn onto Dr. Loomis. He starts freaking out because the tattoo of thorn shows up on his wrist, and then you see Michael Myers walk away and in the suit of the Man in Black, and that's pretty much how the movie ends. It's very random. It doesn't play off into any other film, of course, because, you know, Donald Pleasence passed away, so I can understand why the theatrical cut did not include that, but I don't think either version really does Dr. Loomis any favors, and I don't think either version really makes much sense. And on top of that, as far as just the ending of the film in general, the producer's cut adds this whole sequence at the end with the cult and all this that leads into what I was just saying about Dr. Loomis and the tattoo of thorn and all that stuff. But if you watch the theatrical version, there's this whole other sequence that is completely missing from the producer's cut, where they go to this lab and Michael Myers is killing a bunch of people, which is what I mentioned earlier. They cut out this scene that he's just murdering a ton of people. There's like strobe lights going off. He's killing a bunch of people. It's a completely different sequence from the film. And so you could just tell between these two versions that they didn't know what they were trying to make. And between reshoots that Donald Pleasence was not a part of and all of this other random crap that's included in the film, more gore in one version, more crazy cult storyline in another, what you have here is two films that don't understand what they are either way. And I can totally see why this is just one of those that's just not beloved by most people in the Halloween fan base. So with all that said, as far as my personal take, I think the producer's cut is maybe a more enjoyable film if you're into story. But if you don't want to sit around for a bunch of pointless story and you just want Michael Myers killing people, then the theatrical cut is maybe the way to go. I would definitely say I prefer the producer's cut, but I don't think either version is good. And I think that ultimately, either way you go, you're watching a bad Halloween film. And so I'm looking forward to diving into the other two I've yet to cover here on the channel. It's been a while since I've watched these films, so it should be fun to revisit them, poke fun at them, but also talk about the things I enjoy. I wish that I walked away from The Curse of Michael Myers with more positives, but ultimately by the time it was over, I was like, yikes, I hadn't seen it in a long time. It was not as good as I remembered as a kid, but I remembered it not being great in general, and it definitely lived up to that a little bit. Even though I remembered liking it a little bit more, I knew it wasn't great, and rewatching it, it's a lot worse than I remembered, and quite frankly, it's not a film I can see myself revisiting on any upcoming Halloween anytime soon. Maybe somewhere down the line, just to maybe do a run of these films for fun, but yeah, I think if you've never seen this film before, I would say on one hand, it's worth watching for a laugh. On another hand, maybe do yourself a favor and continue to stay away from this one. So that's going to be my thoughts on Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. Leave your thoughts down below. What do you guys think about this film? Where does this rank for you in the franchise? And if you were around when this film first came out, let me know your thoughts. What did you think about this? What did you think about that whole cult element? And which iteration of the film do you enjoy more, the theatrical or the producer's cut? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.